When my son-in-law handed me a cardboard box and told me I had until Friday to clear out my room, I didn't say a word. I just nodded. But when I opened the old duffel bag my daughter had left on the front porch, with a sticky note that just said, "Take your things, Dad," I found something that knocked the breath clean out of me. A bank book, a cashier's check, and a letter written in my daughter's handwriting that I'll never forget as long as I live. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. I'm 67 years old. I worked 31 years for the municipality of Hamilton, Ontario. Roads and infrastructure, nothing glamorous. My wife, Elaine, passed 8 years ago from a stroke that came on a Tuesday morning while she was making oatmeal. We'd been married 42 years. After she was gone, the house on Concession Street felt like a place I was just visiting. 4 bedrooms, a backyard she used to fill with tomatoes every summer, and me rattling around in it alone. My daughter, I'll call her my girl, because that's what she's always been to me. She was the one who kept me going those first couple of years. She'd drive down from Guelph on weekends, bring groceries, sit with me at the kitchen table. She's got her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Then she met him. His name was Evan. She brought him home for Thanksgiving, and I want to be fair. My first impression wasn't terrible. He was polished, good with words. He worked in real estate development and had a way of making you feel like he was always doing you a favor just by being in the room. My girl looked happy, and that was enough for me. I shook his hand, I meant it. They got married the following September. Small ceremony up near Collingwood. I paid for the reception, just over $14,000, which I want to say I gave freely and without expectation. I mention it only because of what came later. The trouble didn't start right away. It crept in the way cold does in an old house. You don't notice it until you're already shivering. About 2 years into the marriage, Evan's development projects hit a wall. He'd over-leveraged on a condo project in Barrie that stalled, and he was carrying debt I didn't fully understand the scale of until much later. He started talking to my daughter about my house, about the square footage, about what the lot alone was worth in today's market. "The Hamilton market is still strong, Dad," my daughter told me one evening on the phone. Her voice had something careful in it, like she was reading from a script she hadn't quite memorized. "Evan thinks if you sold now, you'd clear well over $800,000. You could move somewhere easier to maintain." I was quiet for a moment. So I said, "I just had the gutters cleaned." She laughed, but it wasn't her real laugh. The calls kept coming. Then Evan started calling directly, which he'd never done before. He had a particular way of framing things that made you feel like disagreeing with him was a kind of stupidity. He'd say things like, "I'm not telling you what to do. Obviously, it's your house, but the carrying costs alone on a property that size at your age," and then trail off, like the rest of the sentence was too obvious to finish. I told him I wasn't interested in selling. He said he understood completely. Then he called again 2 weeks later. What happened next I've gone over 100 times in my mind, trying to find the moment I should have seen it coming. My daughter and Evan hit what she described as a temporary cash flow problem. Could they move in with me, just for 6 months, while Evan sorted out the refinancing on the Barrie project? I said yes. She was my girl. Of course I said yes. They arrived with a moving truck. Within 3 weeks, the dynamic in that house had shifted in ways I still find hard to describe. Evan worked from what used to be my home office. He took both parking spots because, he explained, he needed his vehicle and the company van accessible. My daughter cooked, but according to schedules and preferences that seemed to have nothing to do with mine. They had friends over on Friday nights. Good people, I'm sure, but I didn't know any of them. And I found myself going to bed at 8:30 just to have somewhere to be. I ate a lot of meals at the Tim Hortons on King Street that winter. Evan started CCing himself on emails I didn't know I'd agreed to. He'd found a property management firm that, he explained, could handle the leasing of my house if I wanted to explore options. I told him I didn't want to explore options. He said he understood completely. Then came March. I came home from my Wednesday morning walk. I do 6 kilometers along the trail that runs behind Gage Park. I've done it for 15 years. And there were 2 people in my living room I'd never met. A man in his 40s with a clipboard and a woman who was measuring the width of my front window with a tape measure. Evan came out of the kitchen holding a coffee mug like he owned the place, and I suppose by that point some part of him believed he did. Just having a few people take a look, he said. Nothing official, just getting a sense of things. Get them out of my house, I said. That was the first time I used that tone with him. He didn't like it. His face went very still, the way water goes still before it freezes. The people with the clipboard left. My daughter appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, and the look on her face, I've thought about that look many times since. She wasn't angry, she looked frightened. Not of me, of him. But I didn't understand that yet. Things deteriorated quickly after that. Evan stopped being polished. He started making comments at dinner about the cost of utilities, about how the house needed a new roof, about how a man my age shouldn't be rattling around in a place this size by himself. And this last bit would land with particular emphasis, as if my aloneness was a kind of argument he was making. My daughter said very little during these conversations. She looked at her plate. One evening in April, I heard them through the wall of my bedroom. I wasn't trying to listen. But the walls in that house are old plaster and voices carry, Evan said. He's never going to do it voluntarily. My daughter said something I couldn't make out, he said. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to be realistic. In May, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm in Mississauga. The letter suggested, in very careful, very expensive-sounding language, that given my age and certain observations about my cognitive and physical capacity, my family might wish to explore a formal guardianship arrangement, which would transfer decision-making authority regarding my assets and residence to a designated family member. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter for a long time. I'm 67 years old. I take a blood pressure medication and a low-dose aspirin. I walk 6 kilometers every Wednesday and on Saturdays when the weather holds. I read 2 newspapers a day, and I do the cryptic crossword in the Globe and Mail every Sunday morning. I taught myself to cook after Elaine died, and I make a chicken cacciatore she would have been proud of. I called a lawyer of my own. A woman I'd been referred to by a friend from my old work crew, a sharp woman who operated out of an office above a dry cleaner on Barton Street. I brought her the letter. She read it twice, put it down, and looked at me over her reading glasses. This is a pressure tactic, she said. They can't do anything without a proper assessment, and they'd need cause. But I want you to understand, if they keep pushing, this can get complicated and costly. I asked her what I should do. She said, document everything, and don't sign anything. I didn't tell my daughter I'd seen a lawyer. I went home and I was very quiet. June arrived. Evan sat me down like I was being called into a meeting, and told me he'd received an offer from a developer he knew. $860,000 for the house, cash transaction, quick close. He laid a folder on the table in front of me. He'd already had documents drawn up. I want you to think about it seriously this time, he said, for your own good. I looked at the folder. I looked at him. Where, I asked, would I live? He had an answer ready. A senior's residence on the mountain. He'd already toured it. He had the brochure. The monthly fee was $4,200, which he noted was very reasonable for Hamilton. I picked up the folder. I set it back down. I said I needed time to think. He said, how much time? I said, as much as I need. It's my house. That was a Thursday. By Saturday, something in the house had changed again. My daughter wouldn't meet my eyes. Evan spoke to me in the clipped, efficient way of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for you to catch up. On a Tuesday morning in late June, and I know it was a Tuesday because it was my garbage day, and I just brought the bin back from the curb. I came back inside to find a cardboard box sitting at the bottom of the stairs. My cardboard box. Inside it were some of my things. A photograph of Elaine and me at Niagara on the lake, my old Hamilton Tiger Cats mug, a book I'd been reading, my winter gloves, which made no sense since it was June. My daughter was standing in the kitchen doorway. "What is this?" I said. She didn't answer right away. And then she said, "Evan thinks it would be better if you stayed somewhere else while we figure this out." I looked at her for a long time. She was looking at a point somewhere past my shoulder. "This is my house," I said. "Dad, this is my house. I paid off the mortgage 22 years ago. I have the deed. Your mother is buried 6 kilometers from here. This is my house." Evan appeared then. He told me I was being emotional. He told me this was a practical matter. He told me that a man in my situation. I picked up the cardboard box and I walked out the front door. I didn't have a plan. I want to be honest about that. I drove to the Canadian Tire parking lot on Queenston, and I sat in my car for about 40 minutes, not really thinking anything, just existing. Then I called my lawyer. She told me not to go back inside without her present. She said she'd file an emergency application first thing in the morning if I wanted. I said yes. That night I stayed with an old colleague from the municipality, a man I've known since 1994, good man. He didn't ask many questions, just made up the couch and put a blanket on the arm of it. I barely slept. The next morning I drove back to the house around 7 a.m. I didn't go inside. I sat in the car across the street, and after about 20 minutes, my daughter came out the front door. She was carrying something. An old duffel bag, dark green canvas, the one I'd had since the 90s. She set it on the porch railing. Then she went back inside without looking toward the street. I waited another 15 minutes to make sure Evan's car was gone. Then I walked up and got the bag. There was a sticky note on the zipper. "Take your things, Dad," that's all it said. I sat in the driver's seat with the bag on my lap and I opened it. The first thing I pulled out was a small envelope, the kind banks use for documents. Inside it was a passbook for an account I didn't recognize. A savings account opened in my name 8 months ago. I didn't know it existed. The balance was $480,000. I stopped breathing for a moment. I'm not exaggerating. I just stopped. Underneath the passbook was a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my daughter's handwriting, not printed. Handwritten in the careful looping script she's had since she was 10 years old and her teacher made her practice. I opened it. I'm not going to read you every word of that letter. Some of it is between a daughter and her father, and it belongs to us. But I'll tell you what it said in the bones of it. She told me that she had known for over a year what Evan was doing. She told me she'd been frightened of what he would do if she confronted him directly, of what it would mean for her own situation. She told me that she had been quietly, carefully, over 8 months, redirecting money, her own savings, an inheritance from her grandmother's estate that Evan didn't know the full extent of. A small investment account she'd kept separate. She moved it in small transfers, below the threshold that would trigger automatic bank notifications, into an account she'd set up in my name at a branch on the other side of the city. She told me that she'd been building a record of his calls to the law firm, of the guardianship letter, of the conversations she'd had with the developer he was working with, conversations she'd recorded on her phone, quietly, over the past 4 months. She told me she had already spoken to a lawyer, not mine, her own, and that she had contacted the Ontario Securities Commission about certain elements of Evan's business dealings that she'd discovered in documents he kept in the home office. My home office. She told me she was sorry it had taken her so long to be brave. She told me that she'd needed time to make sure everything was in place before she acted. She told me the worst thing she could imagine was watching her father lose the house her mother had died loving, and she would have done anything to stop it. She told me to go home, that she'd taken care of it, that Evan would be gone by the end of the week. I sat in my car on that street in Hamilton and I cried. I'm 67 years old and I've cried maybe 4 times as an adult, and I'm not ashamed of any of them. I called my lawyer. She called me back an hour later and told me that yes, there was already movement, that the application Evan had apparently been planning to file had collapsed, that there were separate legal matters now involving his business that were going to keep him considerably occupied. She told me she'd be at my house at 2 p.m. and that I should be there. I was. Evan was not. My daughter was. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and when I came through the door, she stood up, and I crossed the room and held on to her for a long time without saying anything. The house smelled like her mother's house again. I don't know how else to say it. It just did. In the weeks that followed, I learned the full picture. Evan had been using money from a client trust account in his real estate business, something he'd kept very carefully hidden, even from my daughter, until she started looking. The Ontario Securities Commission investigation was already underway before she contacted them. Her information accelerated it considerably. Evan was eventually charged with fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. His legal troubles kept him occupied for a very long time. The divorce was finalized 11 months later. The house on Concession Street is still mine. I got the gutters cleaned again last fall. My daughter visits most weekends now, just like before, though she stays in the spare room instead of driving back to Guelph the same night. We eat dinner at the kitchen table and talk about whatever we feel like talking about, and sometimes we don't talk at all, and that's all right too. The duffel bag is still in the front hall closet. I haven't gotten rid of it. I don't think I will. People ask me sometimes what I should have done differently, whether I should have seen it sooner, whether I should have acted faster, and I think about that. I do. But here's what I've settled on. The most dangerous thing Evan ever did was convince me that my daughter had turned against me, because as long as I believed that, I was alone. And he was counting on it. She never did. Not for a single day. Before you leave, tell me, have you ever misjudged someone the way I misjudged my own daughter? Have you ever been so certain the people you love had abandoned you, only to find out they were working quietly, right beside you, the whole time? If this story moved you at all, stay with me. There's more to tell.